Hello, everyone. Alicia Ashcroft here, writer and storyteller for the Faculty of Student Development. My pronouns are she, her, and this is Building Safe Community. Before we go further, I want to acknowledge that the Kamloops campus is situated on the lands of the Kamloops Secwepemc within the Secwepemc-Ulu, the traditional unceded territory of the Secwepemc people. Now, when we talk about violence, it's also necessary to recognize Canada's occupation of Indigenous lands without consent and the ways in which coercion and violence have been inflicted on Indigenous people's bodies and lands through all of colonialism. Alongside every act of violence exists a parallel story of resistance to that violence. And so Indigenous peoples' historical and ongoing resistance to colonial violence must also be recognized. And also to make sure that we're all grounded in a collective understanding of the word violence, we'll refer to the World Health Organization's definition of violence, which is as the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. Okay. We're going to take a breath here. Today we are going to hear from a robust collective of campus and community partners. So let's kick things off with some introductions. I'm going to throw it to Jen.
Hello, my name is Jen Johnson. My pronouns are she and her. I work at the Kamloops Sexual Assault Counseling Center. I do crisis response there, as well as community partnership and outreach and education. I've been working really closely with Kamloops Immigrant Services and TRU in the last year and a bit, the last year or so, trying to kind of create better service connectivity for newcomers to Kamloops and to Canada. And so for anyone who doesn't know about KSAC, we're a counseling organization. We offer free counseling for adults of all genders, as well as children who've either experienced or witnessed gender-based violence or abuse. And we also operate a 24-hour crisis line and hospital accompaniment for survivors of assaults. So that's me. I'm really happy to be here with everyone today, and I'll pass it over to Megan.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Haggerty. I also use she, her pronouns, and I work at TRU, so I'm one of the sexualized violence prevention and response managers on campus, which is a big title to say that we do education and prevention work on campus. We also support survivors in any way that they need, and then we work on policy as well. So currently there are 3 of us on campus that are available to support students, and I believe contact information, everything will be shared later, so I will throw it to Sage.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sage Chang, working at Kamloops Immigrant Services. My pronouns are she and her. Kamloops Immigrant Services support individuals and families to settle their lives and connect to the community in Kamloops. Our ultimate goal is to guide and facilitate them in the community and be part of our society so that they feel Kamloops is their home and feeling safe and feeling sense of belonging. Thank you. I'll pass to Navisha.
Hi, I'm Navisha Panjwani. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a peer mentor at Wellness Center at TRU. I have been there for 3 years, and we provide a safe space for students on campus and resources and a few other things. Yeah.
So great to be here together. So every day this week, TRU Student Life, TRU World, Kamloops Immigrant Services, and Kamloops Sexual Assault Center are talking about building safe community. So we want you to join the conversation to learn how to play a role in ending gender-based violence. And maybe that's a really great place to start. How can we as individuals play a role in ending gender-based violence? Megan, I'll start with you and we can jump in from there.
I think there's lots of different ways. It's kind of, is mine being glitchy or can you hear me?
No, you're here. We see you. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, it was kind of freezing on my end. I think there's lots of different ways people can be a part of the solution. I think the first one kind of is starting with learning more about what violence is and why it happens. And there's lots of great resources, whether that's coming to workshops at TRU or KSAC or with KIS. But I think kind of learning to recognize all of the different forms of violence and how it can show up is one place you can start to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Jen, do you want to jump in with your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that I really agree with a lot of what Megan said, and was thinking about this question in terms of like anyone who's watching this webinar is probably not the sort of person that's going to be perpetrating like overt acts of gender-based violence. And at the same time, we all live in this collective culture where these things are happening like much more often than any of us would like them to be. And so then it kind of becomes like zooming out to the bigger picture of what are little ways that we might be upholding some of those structures or beliefs that end up perpetuating gender-based violence in terms of like gendered stereotypes or sort of like scripts around gender, whether it's, you know, like sort of objectification of women or other marginalized genders, or like, you know, laughing off jokes that feel like they have sort of a violent undertone to them. So I think like all the little ways that you can just start noticing those things in your daily life, like get to know that sort of rape culture pyramid, which maybe we can post in the comments, that sort of shows like the levels, and then just see like where in your life can you start dismantling those little parts of rape culture that kind of set the stage for those bigger acts of violence that occur.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think, and that seems to come up so often in these conversations about someone going, well, I'm not the problem. I will never assault someone. But then thinking about that pyramid and thinking about, well, would you make a joke or would you not say something? And so thinking that it really does start with those very small details in the stories we tell and the jokes we tell and the conversations we have and the way we treat people and the way we look at stories. Thank you for saying that. Sage, Navisha, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sorry, Navisha. Whoa.
Both of you at the same time. Okay, Sage and then Navisha, go for it.
I believe the cultural differences plays in somewhat role behind. You know, some countries, you know, this type of gender violence is not okay, but acceptable, being bystanders or happens so often, or, you know, there's not really like the law in place to stop it. So in some culture, it's kind of, okay, taboo to talk about, or so many factors placed behind it. And here in Canada, you know, we came here and then realized that, oh, actually, this wasn't okay. And I have voice to say no, but I am culturally trained not to. So where do I go? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Navisha.
Yeah, some very great points raised by everybody. Something that I think is kind of vital to all of this is when we're educating about when we're educating about these topics. Where I come from, it's usually just done with women, where you have that talk about what rape is, or what violence looks like, or how to prevent it, or like what to do if it happens. But like men are never really part of this conversation ever, and it's almost they're not even told what rape is many times, or like they're not told, hey, like that is not okay. So not saying that there's only like it only happens to women, being mindful of like it happens to everybody, and also like including everybody in this conversation, regardless of their sex, their age or gender. So yeah, that's something that I think should be done. And apart from that, like Jen said, really important that you take those little steps and you speak up when you see something, when you hear a song that you don't think is sitting well with you, and you're like, well, we don't really want to listen to this. Or when you see a post on social media, and I know like that is really exhaustive, but I feel like that's an important step, especially at this time when we communicate through social media so much, and we kind of show ourselves as to like what we think or what we believe in.
Yeah, and I think when you're dismantling it, you have to look at the minutiae of it. And of course, we often get together, we talk about how rape culture appears in like popular culture and in movies that we watch and television and romantic narratives. And I think there does come a point where you can't unsee it, or like, wow, this is like super problematic behavior, and yet it's been fed to me as something that's romantic. So again, too, when we think about people that perpetuate violence, that there are lots of different reasons why. And so again, we're taught that if there is a perpetrator, it's a man in a mask lurking in the shadows, when it can be someone that you know or trust. So the more that we look at and unpack and dismantle those stories as well as other things, and it just, yeah, then you start to be able to see it and you can't unsee it, and then from there you're able to recognize it and move forward and maybe call people out if it feels appropriate, because again, it's not, and this is going to segue beautifully into some questions around being an active bystander, because again, it's that thought of, well, I'm not going to cause harm, but would you stand by if harm was being caused, and how could you do that in a safe way? Before we move on, does anyone have any final thoughts about this particular subject matter, or do we feel comfortable moving on to the 4 Ds of being an active bystander? Okay, sounds good. Now, does anyone want to just jump right in and tackle the 4 Ds of bystander intervention? That's our first bit of trivia today. But Jen?
I can jump in on that. So the 4 Ds, and we've laid this out in one of our social media posts that'll be coming up this week. But the idea is distract, delegate, direct, and delay. And so the idea is that if you see something happening, like, for example, you see a situation where someone looks like they're being made uncomfortable by someone making advances on them. This might have been, back when people went to bars, like someone in the bar who's kind of trying to clearly move away from someone who's being a little bit more in their face, or, it could be anywhere. It could be online as well. So the idea is to just kind of like, if you see that happening, to sort of put yourself in between that situation, if it's safe to do so, which of course is always really important too. So distract in terms of even just going up and asking someone, like if you're on campus, going up and just asking where a building is, to just sort of break that communication that's happening, or, asking them when the bus comes. Delegate could look like bringing in somebody else to go get help if it's a more serious situation, or even to like make a call. Direct is basically like being direct, so sort of approaching the situation head on rather than assuming that somebody else is going to do it. And then delay is the idea of kind of sticking around with the person. So if the person who was sort of perpetuating the harassment or the assaultive behavior or whatever, if they've gone, then sticking around with the survivor, and just kind of checking in to make sure that they're okay, and to see if they need any follow-up from them or from you and resources.
And thinking too about how something like that could happen and you could really kick into survival mode. And so thinking once that circumstance or situation has changed, that's when you could possibly really deflate, and the reality of that circumstance could feel really impactful, because in the moment it's like, we're just got to sort of just get through this. So I think that is so essential to have that just opportunity for a debrief or a check-in, or do you feel like you need some additional support, and how can we help achieve that? Does anyone else have any thoughts on how to be an active bystander safely?
I feel like it's always a good idea to kind of just go through some quick tips online and see that there's little things that you could do. It can look as small as just like making sure that when you're with a group of people, or even for somebody else and you're at a bar, you're making sure that nobody's spiking somebody else's drink, or asking people if they're comfortable being by themselves when they're at a bar, or if they feel safe, and something that have always come up in this conversation, and I feel like it's always really important to say, is it's okay. Like you might ask somebody if they feel safe, and they go like, oh, ha ha ha, I know that person, and we're like together, and like it's okay. But like just like being sure that like you asking that question is not wrong, and that doesn't mean that you're disrespecting somebody, and it's always better to check in and be there instead not being there, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. We don't want to assume that someone else will take it. And actually, what's really coming to mind as well is if, again, it seems that the 4Ds, you can really look to the person that is being harassed and be like, hey, do you want to walk to class together or whatever? And again, thinking that can be, I'm having this memory of being in a bachelorette party, and there was a guy that we all had these little bunny ears. And this guy kept touching everyone's bunny ears. And it was just like, hey man, consent is super cool. So just like ask before touching people's ears. And he didn't. And I actually was just like, what did I say? And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that came out so strongly. But it was also just that you kind of it can be so exhausting of just constantly being a place of just like, we're just trying to dance and have fun and be with the girls or be with your crew, and then you're constantly in this place of hypervigilance. Because I remember that night in particular, because he went up ripping the bunny ears off of my head after trying to be cool and whatever. And then I remember just like snapping into that mode of just like counting all of the people. Let's get everyone out of here. But it's such a challenge because you just feel like you have to constantly live in that place of hypervigilance, and saying something can also feel dangerous. And then you're having to make those decisions in the moment. And so how can we have a thought beforehand about what we would do in the event of an incident so that we feel safe? And yeah, that's so funny that bunny ear incident just came bubbling back to me. It was like, no thank you. Does anyone have any thoughts? Megan, it looked like you were working on a thought.
I have many things percolating through my brain. I think, yeah, it's just important to recognize that we kind of mentioned before, everybody has different kinds of identities, and you'll be safer in different kinds of situations, and so that's okay. But to know that there are times when you can do things, but if there's something that, if you're judging the safety of the situation for yourself and you fear backlash or something, then those would be the instances where maybe it's okay to not say anything, and it's okay to not beat yourself up for that later or feel guilty for it. Sort of like first aid, right? Like you want to make sure that your safety is also there. It doesn't mean you can't do anything. Maybe that's where delegate comes in, and you let a bartender know, or you let an instructor know you saw some harmful stuff on a discussion post or something. So just to keep in mind that there's different skills that you can use in different contexts. And then what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, you can sort of practice them in different aspects of your life too, right? So we're talking about this in a sexualized violence kind of way, but you can use the same kind of strategies and skills if it's like racism or if it's homophobia, things like that. So you can practice them in different ways, and it doesn't have to be comfortable, but it can still be helpful and really signal to the people around you what your values are and that you're maybe a safe person to check in with.
I really liked what you said, Megan, about not being too hard on yourself on the other side of that. Because again, I think it's really important to acknowledge that the freeze as a trauma response is so real. And then, 12, 24, 48 hours later, it's like, oh, there it is. There's that zinger. There's that really good comment that I would have made. And so just really thinking about how it is such a strong reactionary moment. And, and as you say, there's different contexts to consider as well. So just knowing that you're doing what you can, but to not put too much pressure on yourself to get it, perfectly right every time. And perhaps you're going to have to reflect on that afterwards. Does anyone have any thoughts to add to that? No, we're good. We're just covering our bases beautifully. Thank you so much. Okay, so, I really love all those insights. And again, we'll just circle back to distract, delegate, direct, delay. And we will see that on social media sometime this week. Now, we'll shift gears a little bit because I want to talk about responding to a disclosure. Now, how we respond, and again, it doesn't have to be exclusively about an incident of sexualized violence, but when we disclose something to someone, if we're positive or negative in our reaction, that can make a real difference in terms of how someone, whether they tell someone else down the track, whether they access supports, or whatnot. So what can we say and do to be helpful, thoughtful, and supportive? So Megan, do you want to kick things off with that?
Sure. I think There's a million different things, so I'll try not to go for too long. But we at the TRU, our messaging typically is listen, believe, empower. So giving the person space and just letting them talk at their own pace, saying as much or as little as they want to, and kind of following their lead on that. Believing them is super powerful. As we all probably know, survivors are often not believed, or they're questioned, or they're blamed. And so just the act of believing someone and literally saying, I believe this happened to you, I'm really sorry to hear this happened to you, can be super impactful. And then we use empowering, or you can use supporting, but basically it's connecting folks to the supports that they need, maybe now, maybe later. And again, just really following their lead on that. So avoiding telling them what they should do, and letting them kind of decide for themselves when they're ready, pieces like that. So that's our broad messaging, but I'm sure there's lots of other nuances and tips and tricks that the others here can offer too.
Yeah. Jen, what are your thoughts from the CASAC perspective?
I think that Megan really did a good job of giving that general overview, and also there's a few things to think about too of like I always kind of think about the fact that someone telling you something like that, especially if it's someone that is a friend or family, like someone you care about, your reaction might be either to be really upset by the news or just to have no idea what to say and to sort of feel really uncomfortable. So I think it's really important that as the person who's receiving that disclosure, that we stay as calm as we can in that moment, and make sure that you take care of yourself afterwards by maybe debriefing with someone else that you trust, but not putting like any kind of emotional, like a big emotional reaction of yours onto the person who's telling you. To just try to, I mean, it certainly makes sense to be empathetic and to let them know, like Megan said, that you believe them and that you're sorry that they're going through this, but not sort of like flying off the handle in anger or outrage. Outrage.
I can't believe your news is happening to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like making it about, if the person who told you is now trying to console you because of your reaction, like maybe just dial it back a little bit. And just stay with them. And like Megan said, just listen and just let them tell you what they're ready to share without asking a bunch of questions. Like if there's a question that you want to know that the answer is going to help you get them a resource, that's great. But if there's a question that you want to ask just because you're curious about details, just probably don't go there.
Yeah, morbid curiosity is not the vibe in this scenario. Yeah, and just being really thoughtful and caring. Navisha, Sage, do you want to add anything to that?
Maybe take up the judgmental too, because we're, as a human being, we tend to just give a thought as a judgmental way, thinking, oh, because you were doing this, that's why. Like, take that off, not because of that happened. So take the judgment off and do not blame. There's no blame. It's not blame game. And yeah, like Megan and Jen said, believe and let them lead the conversation and be there and listener.
And I think that questioning, even if it comes from a place of good intentions of like, well, what was the circumstances, that I think that can really feel like there's some judgment in there or some blame in that line of questioning. So really just treading very lightly. And again, making that space so you're not centering yourself in the conversation and asking too many questions. Navisha, what were you going to say?
Yeah, it's really important that you keep the questions to minimum and really listen to them, and it's their time, not making it about you is something that you want to be really mindful of. And the other thing that you want to be really mindful of is meeting them where they're at. If they want to just talk about it and they don't want any support and they feel comfortable just like talking about it, let them talk about it. If they're looking for support, offer support. And keeping in mind that there's different supports that are available at different stages. If they just want to talk, there's a peer mentor, there's friends. If they want to maybe reach out to a person who knows a little bit more about, maybe they just want to go for counseling, maybe they just want to report it, or maybe they want to take full action around it. There's different there's different levels of support and different levels that they can reach out to, and being mindful of asking them and letting them lead the conversation instead of being like, no, this is what you should do, but I think that you should report it. It's your responsibility. Not having that judgmental tone if they don't want to talk about it to anybody else, and being mindful that they felt comfortable sharing with you. That's the reason they're sharing with you, and being mindful of that, and they might not feel as comfortable around other people.
Yeah, and thinking how precious that trust is, that when that person brings that to you, that you want to be so delicate with that trust so that they feel as though that was a possibly good experience or positive experience to feel heard and believed. Well, actually, a question that's coming to mind for me is, say if you've received a disclosure from someone, and you have a meaningful conversation, and maybe some supports are discussed, and just an FYI, there's these services. Can you follow up with someone? How can we check in on someone? A couple days or a week or something after that kind of conversation. Is that appropriate to check in and ask how someone's doing? Dan?
Usually,
sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Oh my, get in there.
Yeah. I think that it depends on your relationship with the person, but generally if they came to you with that information, I think the next time you see them, or, even just to give them a quick text or a call and just say like, hey, I've been thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay. Not pushing it, but also not giving the impression that you don't want to talk about it, or you're trying to sweep it under the rug or get them to forget and move on. So I think that reaching back out and checking in is appropriate.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything they want to add to that?
Sometimes, like, what I do too is ask people sort of if you're like wrapping up whatever sort of interaction you're having with them, and just ask them if they want you to check in with them in a little while, or if they would rather, and it depends on your relationship, like Jen said, with them too. Some people do want you to reach out, and they might be like, yeah, I'm not someone who would ever reach out for help, so definitely check in with me. And others might be like, nope, this was good, thank you, I will never speak of this again until I'm ready. So I think, yeah, it's okay too to ask them if they would be okay with that, or if they would rather sort of be the one coming to you too.
I love that. That's such a great practical way to lovingly wrap up that conversation. Because again, too, and I think about it from a survivor perspective, that sometimes you are capable of or ready to talk about the incident, or even just the survivor experience, because that is a journey unto itself. Like thinking about that moment from the disclosure up until you access and then navigate those supports, like that's a long road. And then wanting someone to know, we can talk about this, but we can also just talk about life, because again, a survivor isn't just exclusively a survivor. There is so much richness to them as human beings. So walking that line as well of just like, we can talk about this, but we can also talk about Grey's Anatomy or whatever you're into. So making that space as well, so you can be what someone needs them to be in any particular moment. Yeah. Do we have any other thoughts in terms of responding to a disclosure? Another question I had was if we wanted to differentiate between reporting and a disclosure, because those are different things. If you disclose to someone, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to the police. Do we want to just unpack that really quick? Jen, do you want to start? We're making so much space for each other. I love it.
Yeah, I think Navisha had kind of laid this out too, and I think that's such a great way to look at it. Is like, if you just want to tell a friend, that's fine. And if someone tells you that they've experienced sexual assault or violence, you don't have any obligation to take that to the police if they're an adult. If it's a child, it's a different situation. You do actually have to report that to the Ministry of Children and Families. But I mean, assuming here that we're talking about an adult, you can just hold that confidence and hold that conversation with them. And so, yeah, if you just want to talk to a friend, or you could reach out for counseling, whether it's through something like KSAC or the SV office at TRU. You can also do what's called a third-party report. And so this would be if someone was sexually assaulted and they wanted to report, maybe because they were worried about the potential for someone perpetrating this kind of violence in the community. And so to do that, you'd go through community-based victim services, which is a service that we have at the Sexual Assault Counseling Center. And so there's a way to make an anonymous report. So Jody, our CVSB worker, she would take that information to the police for you, but it wouldn't have your name attached to it. So that way it's on record. And maybe if a few people come forward and there seems to be a pattern, then they can move on it. They can't like launch a full investigation with an anonymous report, but it can be a way for people, if they're not ready to have their name attached to it or to go through a whole big legal process, to at least feel like they might feel like that is something that's helpful for them for their healing. And then you can go, the next level would be to go to the police and start an official report, give a statement, and then potentially be involved if there was a legal process where you might be a witness in court, which is a big involved process that can take up a lot of a person's life. But some people might find that really empowering to be involved in the process of seeing justice hopefully be served to the person who did this to them. There's also some civil actions that can be taken where you could sue the person who assaulted you if it caused you to lose your work or have a disability or miss school or things like that. So there's definitely some different options, and it's really good to know that there's a whole spectrum of options available. And especially when we're talking about international students, I think there can be a lot of fear, and maybe Sage will be able to talk about this a bit too. It's like people might have questions like, well, if I tell anybody about this, then are they going to tell is that going to affect my study permit or even my passport, or am I going to have a permanent record that's going to affect my ability to get PR later down the road? So I think that those are really important things to touch on, especially for people who didn't necessarily grow up in a Canadian context.
Thank you for saying that. Sage, did you want to speak to that? I know that a question we've had from students is, are the reports going to affect my student visa status?
Well, basically, whatever visa-related matter, I can't really give concrete answer because I'm not trained immigration person. I'm not immigration officer. However, by just reporting some kind of incident to RCMP, your student visa is not going to get revoked. So you're safe. If you need to reach out, ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And too, as you're chatting, there's so many, my brain wants to envision like a flow chart in terms of all of the different options from the moment that you disclose to, well, you could do this and you could do this. And again, too, I think there's something about receiving a disclosure. And if you have access to that information about what services are available, maybe being mindful about not overwhelming someone too much about process and maybe getting the ball rolling with the services. You could check in with these different folks. You're not going to be in trouble. And then moving forward from there, as opposed to like, well, these are all of the ways that you could seek justice and support and healing. And so, because again, I think that it's safe to say that if you've experienced an incident like this, you don't have a necessarily clear sense of where you want to go from there. And so again, just thinking about, you don't have to make all of those decisions in one day. It will take time. And so I think it's about cultivating some support, a support system in which you're able then to go, I think I'm ready for this stage. What is that going to look like? I think I'm ready for this stage. What is that going to look like? As opposed to trying to solve it all in the early days or on day one in that one conversation. I think it's important to know that you will have possibly many conversations about the healing process. And again, I think then that can be part of it, but every person is going to be different. But yeah, I think that there is so much fear about reporting and thinking you're going to be in trouble or something bad will happen to you. And so, yeah, I think it's important to just know that you won't be in trouble. But thank you for just breaking that apart about the disclosure and the report. Now, do we want to is there any other final thoughts we'd like to touch on in terms of what supports are available in the community and where someone can go to learn more, not even just as a support system?
I just had one piece on the reporting, Alicia.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to include as well that TRU, under TRU's policy, if it's connected to campus, that could be another reporting avenue for people that might help with not having that person in your classes and things like that. So if it does happen kind of connected to campus and the campus community, then us, like the folks in our office, can also help people figure out if reporting through our policy might be a good fit. And then we also have staff on campus who are trained in terms of the immigration pieces, who will be able to advise on student visas and things. I'm sure there's folks at Kamloops Immigrant Services as well, but just so that everyone knows, we do have some on campus too.
Muted myself, that's fine. Thank you very much. It's just the day that we're having, isn't it? The facilitator's gonna have the mic off. And I think that's so important to just think about, if you do want to reach out, that you can just make one connection, and that connection can really, open like a flower in terms of what your steps are. And having someone help guide you through that process, I certainly would not have been able to navigate my own survivor experience without a team of people. It takes a village. And so I think that's really, that to me was really important, having that support. Okay, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your thoughtful answers. Now, we wanted to shift a little bit into thinking about healthy relationships. Again, thinking about sexualized violence, and that it can occur within our relationships, in and amongst other circumstances. So let's talk a little bit about some green flags in a healthy relationship. What can we look for? And again, not even just romantic relationships, our friendships as well. Jen, did you want to start?
I think that so much of it is about how you feel around people. And sometimes that can really be clouded by our past experiences too. But I think really just like doing sort of gut checks with people. Again, like you said, whether it's romantic relationships or friendships, like, do you feel like you can be yourself around this person? And do you feel like decisions are being made kind of a thoughtful and compromising way, where it's not just always one person making decisions? Like, do you feel generally more good than bad when you're with people? I think is really a good place to start. And I think too that if you're feeling like you're kind of hiding parts of your relationship with somebody from people you love, then that's moving into not being a green flag. But like, if there are things that you think, and you don't have to share every detail about your relationships with everyone in your life, but if there are things you're holding back because if you're told your friends this was happening, they would advise you to break up with that person, that's a time to probably check in with yourself and potentially with your support network.
Yeah. Navisha, you were nodding your head and smiling. What do you want to add to that?
That is just such a good point to kind of a good place to check in with yourself. Like, am I hiding parts of my relationship from people that I love? I just that just really blew my mind every time now I think of it. I was like, oh my God, sometimes it is that easy, and not just to overcomplicate whatever that you're going through. But other things that something that really resonates with me is just making sure that it's not just about your physical safety, but also your mental safety. And for me, a healthy relationship looks like that I set goals for myself, and the other person supporting my goals instead of setting those goals for me, and not kind of pushing, it's not exactly pushing me around. And although they might have the best interest at heart, but if I'm around a person who's setting my goals for me instead of supporting my goals that I have set, I think that might be a place where I have to check in and evaluate things. And yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And thinking too that you want in your friendship and relationship circle to have people that are championing for you and encouraging you and helping, nudge you forward when you feel you need that, as opposed to controlling you for you and feeling. And actually what comes to mind as well is relationships you should be able to set boundaries with. And if someone is pushing through those boundaries in the same way of pushing through your goals, that can feel problematic as well. Sage, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
I say trust your instinct. Like most of the times you look back, then you know, I'm not sure about that. Then
Yeah.
you're right. So I say trust your instinct.
Megan, I'm gonna bring it to you, but I'm wondering, like, say that we're all really impacted by Jen's comment about like parts of a relationship that we don't share with others. Where do you think is at the root? If someone's having a relationship where there are some red flags, but there's some fear around sharing that, like, what are some possible barriers to speaking up to that, even within our friendships?
Yeah, I think there's lots. We could probably do a whole piece unpacking that. I think one piece of it, especially in a romantic relationship context, is how often we hear like relationships are hard. You just gotta like work through things and stuff. And we hear that narrative so much that sometimes, especially maybe if it's a first relationship or something like that, and you have something that's giving you attention and feeling, but you just think, oh, well, it's hard. We have to work through this, or like people work through their problems. And I think that's one reason. People may not speak up. Maybe they're part of like a 2S LGBTQ population, and others in their support network don't actually know that yet. And they don't feel safe or ready to tell their community or other loved ones that piece of themselves, and like that could be a reason. They might fear additional or escalating violence from this person if they speak up. So yeah, I think it's when you have those pieces though, because I totally agree with what everyone said, like if there are pieces you feel like you can't share or you're hiding, or your gut is saying like, I don't think this is right. We're all here in community, like on campus in the community as sort of third parties, non-judgmental third parties that you can check in with about those things too if you just need some clarity, if you're not sure about them. I think, yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Does that answer your question in a little bit of a rambly way?
No, that's perfect. No, and I think too, like we were chatting about again, what we have learned in our lives about what relationships look like, or what is perceived as romance. And again, like thinking about that intuition is there of like this doesn't feel right, but like the collective consciousness is saying that this is maybe possibly romantic for like someone to be really involved in your life or really have an opinion about what you should do, and so to think about how you can find a safe way to unpack that and say, does this feel, is this, am I wrong? Is this, and having someone else from the outside. And I've certainly had that in my own life of like, oh, no, that's not what we're hoping for in relationships. So again, if you recognize it, but don't necessarily know what to do with it, thinking that you could have a conversation with someone maybe outside of your friendship circle. Because I think, again, that's a fear too. And I think we've all been in those circumstances of seeing that from the outside, of seeing a relationship and being worried for a friend and feeling like, well, if I say anything, then they're going to get married, and then that I won't be friends with her anymore, or you feel afraid to speak up, and so thinking about there's some nuances and about that as well. Yeah. Does anyone have any thoughts on green or red flags and relationships and how we can cultivate the green ones?
I just wanted to pick up on something that Megan said about, yeah, checking in with someone. Like it occurs to me that this is a really good time. I mentioned KSAC's 24/7 anti-violence line, and like I think sometimes people think that their issues are not big enough to use that service, but like this is a great time to use that service if you're in a relationship where it's making you feel like not good, kind of all these things we've been talking about, like there's some little red flags or whatever, and you're not sure who to talk about. Like you can call the crisis line anonymously and just be like, hey, this is some behavior that's happening in my relationship. Is that normal? And just get a perspective from somebody who is like, I don't know your life. I'm not going to come in here and tell you what to do, but I might be able to give you a little bit of perspective on like some dynamics around abuse and control tactics and things like that, and maybe just talk through where you want to go from there. So yeah, it just occurs to me that like there are safe options, and like these resources exist exactly for this reason. So just for people who are out there thinking like, oh, I do wish I had somebody in community to talk to about that. How would I even do that? I think we'll post the 1-800 number But yeah, just to really encourage people to like reach out for those resources, because like Megan said, we're here and that's exactly why.
And that urge to minimize, again, because we have this vision in our heads of what violence is. They didn't hit me, and they haven't and so being, as opposed to thinking, well, there can be violence without someone putting their hands on you. So that's a really great resource. And again, too, thinking about connecting with a counselor or another resource that, again, it's like they're not ingratiated in your life. They don't know your mother, so feeling like it's a really perfect person to connect with, because they have a real strong sense of the supports, and they can also have a sense of the education of what to look out for or how to navigate something. So that crisis line, that's such a great plug. It doesn't have to be an extreme scenario to just check in and ask a question. And that's a great preventative option. Okay, thank you so much. Unless we have any other thoughts on red or green flags, I wanted to talk a little bit about consent and healthy relationships. Are we ready for that? So consent is, crucial to healthy relationships, but it's not just connected to sex and romance, nor is it exclusively in real-time scenarios. So we wanted to look at what consent looks like just in our day-to-day relationships, but also online. So maybe we'll just chat a little bit about consent and healthy relationships in general. Megan, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah. What do I want to say on this one? I think that, like you said, consent is super important in all of our spaces. I think we are hearing more and more about it because it is so important. And often the message we hear is like either yes means yes or no means no, and all those kinds of pieces. And we focus on that side of it, on the giving a yes or getting a no, or we focus really strongly on like getting a yes is the thing. Like you have to get a yes, but we never talk about like, if you get a no, here's how you deal with that. And if we don't talk about that piece, then what happens is people keep pivoting and trying to get the yes in a different way, which is not actually consent. So my big long rambly point being asking for consent is super important in all kinds of spaces, as is learning how to manage your stuff if someone says no to you in any kind of way that they say no, whether it's like their body language pushing away, verbally saying it, whatever it is. I think we need to kind of work parallel on both of those things to build proper consent and good relationships.
Yes, because you can't sort of ask for consent and then kind of like blow past it if you don't get the answer that you want, and you need to be prepared for someone to say no. Actually, what's coming to my mind as well is we're sort of inching towards the post-COVID era. I've had a few times where people are like, can I give you a hug? And then I'm like, I've said yes because it felt appropriate, but it's like, how would I navigate it if it was like, no? If that's okay. But thinking about those moments where I saw my brother's children and I was texting with his wife and I said, would it be okay to give the kids a hug? And we had that conversation before the day, because then it just felt like, so then you're not like reaching for someone's child and then being like, no, or feeling in that moment that it's uncomfortable. So looking for those moments of looking ahead. But yeah, thank you for that answer, Megan. Sage?
Yeah, like education, I think. Like my child who is 2.5 years old, she says it, no thank you, this is my body. I'm not feeling like being hugged. No thank you. Like, educate them and educate us and verbalize it when we can, or even body language, like, then it's obvious that, but of course, for other side, is it really no? But having everybody educated, yeah, that is no, then I get it. Okay, that was no. So I think education is the key. And the workshops like this is one way to educate ourselves too. So it's good.
Yeah, I am living for the boundary setting that your daughter is. And actually, I was really struck by that idea. And I think we've all been there as children. We'll go and hug Uncle so and so and just like, ugh, I don't, and not feeling like you had that option to be like, I don't know them. I don't want to hug them or I don't feel comfortable. And so really building that into the language from an early age of, would you like to, hug Uncle so and so? No, thank you. Okay, all right, we're moving along, as opposed to just like forcing someone and it's rude to not to. So I'm living for that. Like, no, thank you. My body. Next. We're setting those boundaries and we're living for it. Navisha, what are your thoughts?
110% agree, like having those boundaries set, and that's something that I am still working with, how to say no, and like making sure like sometimes it has to sound polite, sometimes even if it doesn't sound polite and you might feel uncomfortable, but it's better to deal with that uncomfortable than being those boundaries kind of like being invaded. So yeah, that's something that's really important. And then just consent that is outside of a relationship, outside of sex. What it might look like is it can be as simple as asking before entering someone's room, and like that is consent to, or like your roommate if they are like making something or if they're getting drinks and they like instead of just like being like, hey, like we're doing this, like do you want to do this, do you feel like it? Something else that I'm trying to be more mindful of is when I am going through something, checking in with the other person if they are ready to like have a tough conversation, or would they just rather like not talk about feelings and just like watch TV that day or like do something else. And also being mindful of somebody's boundaries when it comes to their mental place and your mental place. That's something that I feel like we should all be working on too.
I love that. And what comes to mind too is thinking about if someone is having a day, and I know that's something that I work on because I'm an advice giver. I love to share the wisdom and having to go, do you want me to listen or would you like some advice? And so then you're not giving unsolicited advice. I'm like, here's what I think of your scenario, and so looking for those opportunities of, does this feel like a good time to talk? What would you like to talk about? And just asking those questions, and it doesn't have to be a big deal. It's more just like, is this a good time? And I think people appreciate that. But there is something so intrinsically connected with boundary settings and feeling like a bad person. Like, I just need to be extremely open and extremely available at all times. And why does it feel so hard to just go, no, now is not a good time. No, I don't think we can hug. And you're not a bad person and I'm not a bad person. We're just setting those boundaries. So we want to try to normalize that as much as possible, because then otherwise, we've sort of all indicated, then you find yourself of like, it's a yes, but it's not a true yes. And then you feel, again, afterwards, when you feel like you're like, I really let someone step on my boundary. I wish I had protected that better. And I think that's just, again, try not to beat yourself up, but just go, okay, next time I want to be a little bit better at that. Jen, what are your thoughts on all the things?
I think there's just so many good little pieces from everyone. And it makes me think back to even what I was saying at the beginning about like unlearning those sort of gendered scripts. Because I think that for so many of us as women in this culture and in other cultures too, that we are so conditioned to just be compliant and nice. And that we, like Navisha was saying, it's almost like we would rather be uncomfortable in our bodies than to say no to someone and potentially make them uncomfortable because they wanted a hug or whatever it is, or sex, like all the way up to, being in a relationship with someone, because we'd rather say yes and just like live with our own discomfort in that situation than say no to someone and make them feel bad. And so like that's where dismantling this sort of culture that perpetuates gender-based violence starts, is like letting people have their authentic reactions and letting people say no, and then gracefully accepting that no. Like Megan had said, like, we don't talk about that. Like, it sucks when someone says no to something you want to do, whether it's having sex or like going to the restaurant you wanted to go to. And so we need to all learn how to be like a lot more mature, I think, around that idea of both saying no and not feeling like we have to manage someone else's emotions, and then also managing our own emotions when we get a no so that we don't put that on the other person.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, and the idea of like, I'm not setting this boundary to hurt your feelings. I just don't want to go to Earl's tonight. Although Earl's is delicious, don't get me wrong. But yeah, again, thinking that it's not something being done to hurt someone. It's like I'm trying to protect myself. But yes, I think that is an enormous lesson to learn. It is like, why do I put myself last? Like when I feel this boundary so strongly, how can I put myself at the forefront to protect myself? Because then again, then we're not having a good time. We're not being really true and authentic in those situations in which consent arises. Actually, again, what really struck me was a conversation I'd had with someone about, they were a waitress. And I mean, I waitressed for years, and I think on some level I kind of separated those two pieces. But when you're working for tips, and that there can be an expectation to be pretty or flirty or friendly or have customers touch you. And so this person had talked a lot about feeling like if I set a boundary, my tip is cut in half, or this guy is going to be a jerk to me for the rest of the time that they're there. And so thinking about how can you set those boundaries if you're in a possibly professional setting, in a circumstance like that. And so there's so many times in your life in which that could really pop up, and how can you set. And I remember setting boundaries as a waitress, and then you sort of being called out for being a bitch. And you it's hard to, but then you're still doing that work because you're still kind of laughing it off, or you're still trying to make it funny, or you're still trying to make it palatable. And so there's so much work and effort that goes on inside of a person's mind to set that boundary in a way that makes it easy for other people.
I think too, Alicia, sorry if I can just jump in really quickly,
Please.
like what everyone is sort of speaking to too is like the power dynamics in it. So sometimes it's going to be easier to set a boundary because maybe you have more equal power with that person, or maybe you have more power with that person. If you're like a supervisor or a boss and you set a boundary, it's probably going to be respected. But when that gets shifted, you might be more fearful of that because, like you said, that person is in charge of your income, they're in charge of your job security, all of these pieces. And so I think that also goes back to what you said about being too hard on ourselves, because sometimes as hard as we try and as much as we want to set a boundary, maybe it's not safe to set that boundary. And a lot of that is in those power dynamics. And so I think my point being, one, sometimes it's hard for really good reasons. And two, if you're checking your power and you're the person who's in a higher position of power potentially, being really intentional about portraying yourself as someone who will respect boundaries, and that it's okay to set a boundary with me because I'll respect like whatever your boundaries are.
No, I love that. And thinking too that if someone is setting a boundary and you're pushing against that's some work to look in about checking your power and like, well, why does that feel like a challenge to me for someone to set their boundary? Thank you for bringing it up just slightly from a higher perspective, so we're able to see that theme. And yes, that power dynamic is enormous. Okay, I'm conscious of the time. We're approaching an hour. I wanted to see if we wanted to touch on what consent looks like online. And of course, I think often we think that the internet isn't like a real place. But yet we live our lives on there, and we're certainly online quite a bit. Do we want to touch on digital consent and digital safety? Jen, do you want to?
Yeah, I think it's such an important topic, and like, again, this is one I think we can do a whole hour on, like tech facilitated gender-based violence, because it's such a problem. And so that's kind of a whole big overarching theme that we could go into. But in terms of consent, I mean, online consent looks like real world or like in-person consent, but you don't have those nonverbal cues. So it's extra important to be really clear with what you want to do. Like, you know, if you're wanting to be flirty with somebody over text or something, you know, like checking in with them, like, is this a good time? Maybe say something like mildly complimentary and then see how they respond. But don't keep pushing it. And, you know, I think that we talk a lot about like sending nudes and things like that. It's like, oh, it's going to kill the mood if I ask permission. Like, no, it's actually going to kill the mood if you just send someone a nude picture and they're like having tea with grandma. So it's like you need to still navigate all of those same things. Like, it's not a free-for-all. Just because you have your phone and you have access to that person doesn't mean that you get to just send them any messages or any material that you want. You still need to make sure that they want to receive that before it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've chatted about this a bit in our planning sessions, and thinking that there seems to be a certain vulnerability of like, hey, would it be okay if I sent you a picture, as opposed to just sending a picture and hoping for the best? And so thinking like you do need to, we don't want to be reactionary in those kinds of interactions, that you do want to be thoughtful and not try to shock someone. And would this be a good time? I've been having some thoughts about you, or do you have a moment to connect? No, actually, I'm at work right now. Okay, well, maybe we'll try it later. Because you get those responses in that same way of sort of like pulling away of like, yes, no, okay, or just silence. And so really looking for those cues, as opposed to like, well, I'm not seeing a no specifically, because either it's a yes or it's a no. So looking for those cues so you're not bombarding someone. So yeah, having that check-in, yeah, maybe it feels a bit more vulnerable, but we want to be thoughtful, because it isn't attractive to send unsolicited information without a conversation about it beforehand. That's not the done thing. Okay, check your power. Check your pics. Navisha, what are your thoughts on digital safety?
I would say it's a little hard to navigate, given that it's still like a newer concept when compared to like consent in person. So just like there's assumptions around apps like Snapchat, where it's like, oh, now that we are here, we're talking here, that means it's okay to send pictures instead of like asking first. So it's a little hard to like set that boundary and be like, no, you have to check in with me first, and like we're doing it like that way instead of you just like bombarding me with pictures. So that's that's the reason I find it a little hard. And also just like when it comes to like withdrawing consent, when you're in an online setting, it's like I have said, and now that there's no body language, and now I can't really be like, now there's like, I can't like pull back. So sometimes that kind of creates a little bit of disruption, or like a lot of disruption, given that I'm still learning how to navigate that, but like being mindful of that and kind of like talking about it instead of like running away from it, or like hoping that they like understand you. And it's like understandable if you're like not comfortable yet, and you don't always have to like do it right and like always be like, no, consent. And like you can be either or way, but like just like checking in with yourself and like knowing that it's okay that you're saying that, hey, like I am not comfortable with you sending me pictures when I'm not ready for them. And it's okay to say that. And like just like really knowing that that's like one of the things that I have had like a really hard time with. But yeah.
Yeah, also that's the new tagline. No consent. Just always. It's always about consent. And too, thinking about as well, if you're sending someone pictures, if someone asks for pictures, just being, just taking a moment to think about where those photos could possibly go. As someone once said, the internet keeps all receipts. So not coming from a place of shame, but just thinking about sharing something and just, do you trust this person? Do you know this person? What does that look like? So we want to be sex positive, but we also just want to be really thoughtful as we have these interactions and making sure that they're safe. Yeah. Now, do we have any final thoughts about that? I have one more question. I wanted to just wrap things up with the idea of making a plan. I'm a big fan of making, I would say, make a mental health plan on a good day, where we're able to think a bit clearly. And actually, we touched on this a little bit beforehand with the recent wildfires. How can we make a safety plan, and who can we make a safety plan with? Jen, do you want to start with that?
I just shouldn't mute myself. Yeah, I think that making a safety plan, whether it's like if there is a relationship where there is some abuse already happening, making perhaps a plan for if I was going to leave, what might that look like? Because sometimes just getting really clear around, like, it can feel so overwhelming, but if you can kind of sit down and write down somewhere where it's going to be safe, or maybe even like go to a friend's place and write it down with them and just have that information. Like, okay, if I was going to leave, these are the steps I would need to take. What would I need to bring with me? What do I need to think about? How will my pets be safe? Whatever it is like that. But also it could just be like a mental health safety plan, like writing down who are the people I can call when I'm really having a bad day, whether it's relationship related or just like all of the crazy trauma that we're all living through right now between, COVID and the weather situation, like the wildfires in Kamloops right now and the, apocalyptic smoke in the air. Like, what are things that I can do that can make me feel like my nervous system just has a moment to like take a deep breath? And maybe it's literally just like stopping and taking 5 deep breaths at some point in your day. But I think, like you said, Alicia, it's like do that in a moment when you have a little bit of capacity to just, it can be as simple as making a few notes of like things that make you happy and just even looking at that list from time to time. It can be as simple as that.
Now I'm muted as well. The cars are going by. It's a very busy day. But again, thinking like we had said this before we had started recording that, I was feeling enormous amounts of anxiety around the wildfires in our community. And what felt like a bomb to me was to just get my paperwork in order, make a plan. And so when, we did feel like we had to sort of up the intensity of preparing to evacuate, it did feel like I knew where things were. I had some time to think about it, so that so those are things that possibly you can do. Then it just feels like, okay, if the unexpected or unfortunate happens, I do have a general sense you're not like, okay, what is it that we need to do in the moment of an emergency or a high stressed out situation. So that feels like a good option. And again, this is where the supports come in, because you could connect with someone about, I think I need to make a plan, and then someone could help you talk that out. And I remember at one point we had talked about a safety plan, and someone said, okay, if you think you're going to climb out this window, let's make sure we can open the window. And is there a ladder on the other side? So really being able to map out that plan so that you can visualize it and hope you never need to use it. But in the event you do need to use it, then you feel like those steps are relatively in place and you're not having to be pushed to make additional decisions on top of fleeing for your life. Do we have any other thoughts about making a plan, making a mental health plan and a safety plan? Sage?
I think it's like a fire drill practice. That's what we do, right? We are not hoping to have fire, but we keep doing this practice. Fire drill, bells are ring. We have a place to meet outside of the building. We keep practicing. So now, when it's calm, nothing is really happening, gather the resources from Jen and Megan and, from us or from outside in the community. Just have the list with you. If something happens, it's there.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that, again, I feel like we have so little control on a grand scale, but that does give you a sense of just control and ownership in your life to just know that those are some things that you can do that help you just move through that. Yeah. Well, it's always such a pleasure chatting with all of you, and we just burned through the hour as always, but I do want to make space for any final thoughts before we wrap up. My final question, as always, when we gather is how we're going to take care of ourselves after this conversation. I think we're all feeling, I think we're all feeling, I know for myself, a little low energy. We're sort of on the tail end of the pandemic and the wildfires, and there's just been lots going on in the world. So I'm going to give my dog a hug after this chat, and I'm going to go and have a little poke around in the garden and briefly then come back inside. I was going to say I wanted to get some fresh air, but I'm going to give my dog a hug. Sage, what are you going to do to take care of yourself after this?
I will keep hydrating myself from this smoke.
Perfect. Good. A little glass of water. We can make that work. Megan?
I'm also gonna do some puppy time, I think. I got a little puppy here that needs some playing, so that's my plan.
Oh, I love it. Also, my brain went to puppets, and then I just pictured you with like puppets. And then I was like, oh, a puppy. Okay. But I just had to make a note of just like, got my consent puppets here. And a good laugh always helps us. Jen, what about you? How are you going to take care of yourself?
I'm gonna go get together with a very good and very calming friend. We're gonna go jump in the river.
Sounds absolutely refreshing, Navisha.
My favorite new thing is to ask myself if I need rest or movement. And I think I need a little bit of rest and then lots of movement today. So and then check in with a friend. That's my plan for the day.
I love that. I'm so glad we are wrapping up on that. Do I need rest or do I need movement? You can ask yourself those kinds of questions about what I need. Do I need advice or do I need listening ear? Thank you so much. And of course, we're going to post all of the information online. And of course, we'll have content throughout the week and beyond that will connect us to all of our supports with Kamloops Immigration Service, Kamloops Sexual Assault Counseling Center, and sexualized violence prevention and response on campus, as well as the Wellness Center galore. Thank you, as always, for your time, for your work on campus and the community, and thank you for making space for serious conversation and laughter and healing and wellness. And I'm here for all of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.